Hello, everyone, and welcome. This is the Apostate Prophet. So today I want to go to through the UN report, the report that a UN team just published for to show that many cases of sexual violence, rape, gang rape, and other forms of violence and torture took place on October 7, perpetrated by Hamas and by other groups. The UN published the report. It came out yesterday, and Hamas responded to it today by saying that they condemn the report, of course, after praising the UN and sucking up to the UN since October 7. Immediately they turned on the UN. And Israel said finally, Israel is actually acknowledging the reality of this. So I want to go through the report and look at it, see what the UN team found, and analyze all of that, because I think this is important and needs to be highlighted. A special team from the United Nations go to Israel, to the Gaza envelope within Israel, and to the West Bank, and throughout Israel. So a team consisting of this woman who is the head of the team. What's her name? Pramila Patten. So this woman here, she went there together with an envoy, a team of experts on sexual assault and sexual violence and all of that. And she came back after 3 weeks or 2.5 weeks of going through Israel, collecting evidence, speaking to all kinds of people and all of that. She came and said there is clear and convincing information that hostages held in Gaza are subjected to sexual violence. So those who are still held in Gaza, because one of the conclusions in the report is that Israelis captured by Gaza and captured by Hamas and taken to Gaza are known or concluded to have experienced sexual violence in captivity, and it is there are reasonable grounds to believe that this is still continuing, which is why she says now that she calls for a ceasefire to immediately get those hostages out of Gaza and all that. Now, there are some people who took issue with this report, of course, because they are anti-Israel, anti-Zionism, pro-Hamas, and so on. And they were like, "Oh, this is not proof. It's not proof. It just says reasonable grounds." No, reasonable grounds is a legal term. A quick definition of reasonable grounds refers to having a good reason to believe that someone has done something wrong or that a place has something connected to a crime. This is important because before the police can arrest someone or search a place, they need to have more than just a feeling that something is wrong. They need to have evidence or facts that would make a reasonable person believe that a crime has been committed. This is called probable cause. It's like when you have a good reason to think your little brother took your toy because you saw him playing with it earlier. That's reasonable grounds to ask him about it. And further, for example, if a police officer sees someone breaking into a house, they have reasonable grounds to suspect that the person has committed a crime. Similarly, if a person is found with drugs in their possession, the police have reasonable grounds to suspect that the person is committing a crime. So this is a solid case. This team went there not to do an investigation, which is also something that people misunderstand. They say, "Oh, they were not there to investigate." Well, what they mean by that is that they were not there to establish all of the facts. They were there to basically establish reasonable ground. What comes next is to go in there and to look at all the details of everything that happened. In a press release issued along with the report, which I will read in a little bit, not fully, but the relevant parts, there are also reasonable grounds to believe that such violence, which includes other cruel, inhuman, and degrading treatment, may be continuing against those still being held by Hamas and other extremists in the Gaza Strip. The report from her office arose from an official visit to Israel at the invitation of the government, which included a visit to the occupied West Bank between 29 January and 14 February. In the context of the coordinated attack by Hamas and others of October 7, the UN mission team found that there are reasonable grounds to believe that conflict-related sexual violence occurred in multiple occasions, including rape and gang rape in at least 3 locations in southern Israel. The team also found a pattern of victims, mostly women, found fully or partially naked, bound and shot across multiple locations, which may be indicative of some forms of sexual violence. In some locations, the mission said it could not verify reported incidents of rape. They say the true extent of sexual violence may never be fully known. It could take months or years to emerge, all of the details. It was not investigative in nature, conducted 33 meetings with Israeli representatives, examining more than 5,000 photographic images and 50 hours of video footage. It conducted 34 confidential interviews, including with survivors and witnesses of the October 7 attacks, released hostages, first responders, and others. The report says that Israeli authorities have faced numerous challenges in collecting evidence. Some people make it look like, oh, this is nothing. It's just, they just went there and just listened to the Israeli authorities, just a few people. No. This here shows the extent of their search. But let's get to the report. So the visit, which was carried out at the invitation of the government of Israel, also included a visit to the occupied West Bank, is what happened. Ethical interviewing of survivors, victims, and witness of sexual violence crimes, and so on. The mission team visited the 4 locations affected by the October 7 attacks in the Gaza periphery, namely Nahal Oz military base, Kibbutz Be'eri, the Nova Music Festival site, and Road 232, where reports of sexual violence had emerged. For the purpose of the present report, information was also gathered pertaining to incidents of CRSV, which means conflict-related sexual violence, reportedly committed in Kibbutzim, Kfar Aza, and Reim, which the mission team did not visit. Information received by the mission team indicates that on the morning of October 7, at about 6:30 and under the cover of an unprecedented barrage of rockets, a coordinated attack by Hamas and other groups happened against civilians, resulted in 1,200 fatalities. Total of 253 individuals, including some deceased, were taken as hostages. And authorities face numerous challenges in the collection of evidence. With very specific challenges related to the crimes of sexual violence. This included limited survivor and witness testimony, limited forensic evidence due to the large number of casualties, and dispersed crime scenes in a context of persistent hostilities. The loss of potentially valuable evidence due to the interventions of some inadequately trained volunteer first responders. This is a shame. The prioritization of rescue operations and the recovery, identification, and burial of the deceased in accordance with religious practices over the collection of forensic evidence. Also, significant number of the recovered bodies had suffered destructive burn damage. Which made the identification of potential crimes of sexual violence impossible. Let that sink in here. Verifying information, limited number of and access to survivors. There was one thing here. While the mission team was able to meet with some released hostages as well as with some survivors and witnesses of the attacks, it did not meet with any survivor victim of sexual violence from October 7, despite concerted efforts encouraging them to come forward. The mission team was made aware of a small number of survivors who are undergoing specialized treatment and still experiencing an overwhelming level of trauma. Further, the internal displacement of several communities from the Gaza periphery to other locations, the relocation of survivors to the Nova Music Festival attacks, both internally and to third countries, as well as the deployment of October 7 first responders from the military forces to combat, hindered access to first-hand information. Here is something. The lack of trust by survivors of the October 7 attacks and families of hostages in national institutions and internal organizations, such as the United Nations, as well as the national and international media scrutiny of those who made their accounts public, hindered access to survivors of the attacks, including potential survivors, victims of sexual violence. I think this is mentioned again further on in the report, that a lot of people A lot of the survivors, victims, and so on felt great hopelessness and mistrust and all of that, not only in the U.S., not only in the UN team, but also in Israeli national and also international organizations and so on. Forensic evidence linking individuals with specific videos. Inaccurate and reliable forensic interpretations by some non-professionals also represented a challenge. Lastly, the mission took place over a limited period of 2.5 weeks and in a context for Israel where no dedicated UN country team or infrastructure is operational. Considering the scale and magnitude of the attacks and the range of locations and the high number of casualties, the mission team could not comprehensively cover the full range of the situation. This is why they are calling for a full-fledged investigation by a UN team to go there and make review everything that is there, everything that happened. Based on the information gathered by the mission team from multiple and independent sources, there are reasonable grounds to believe that conflict-related sexual violence occurred during the October 7 attacks in multiple locations across Gaza periphery, including rape and gang rape in at least 3 locations. Across the various locations of the October 7 attacks, the mission team found that several fully naked or partially naked bodies from the waist down were recovered, mostly women, not only, but mostly women, with hands tied and shot multiple times, often in the head. Although circumstantial, such a pattern of undressing and restraining of victims may be indicative of some form of sexual violence. At the Nova Music Festival and its surroundings, one of the most crucial places, there are reasonable grounds, again, strong, to believe that multiple incidents of sexual violence took place, with the victims being subjected to rape and or gang rape and then killed or killed while being raped. This is the Islamic resistance movement. The Islamic resistance movement, as they call themselves, Hamas, Islamic resistance movement. Reasonable grounds to believe that multiple incidents of sexual violence took place, with victims being subjected to rape and or gang rape. So they have reasonable grounds to believe that gang rape took place, and they go rape and or gang rape, and then killed or killed while being raped. Credible sources described finding murdered individuals, mostly women, whose bodies were naked from their waist down, some totally naked, tied with their hands behind their backs, many of whom were shot in the head. On Road 232, credible information based on witness accounts describe an incident of the rape of 2 women by armed elements, by Hamas terrorists. Other reported instances of rape could not be verified in the time allotted. The mission team also found a pattern of bound, naked or partially naked bodies from the waist down, in some cases tied to structures, including trees and poles, along Road 232. A pattern of bound, naked bodies tied to structures like trees and poles. This is the Islamic resistance movement, the pure Islamic resistance movement that is fighting oppression, supposedly fighting apartheid here. The mission team conducted a visit to Kibbutz Be'eri and was able to determine that at least 2 allegations of sexual violence widely repeated in the media were unfounded due to either new superseding information or inconsistency in the facts gathered. Good to see consistency here. These included a highly publicized allegation of a pregnant woman whose womb had reportedly been ripped open before being killed, with her fetus stabbed while still inside her. I like to think that it is good that this is likely not true. Other allegations, including of objects intentionally inserted into female genital organs, could not be verified by the mission team due in part to limited and low-quality imagery. This will be left to the full-fledged investigation. In Kibbutz Kfar Aza, while reports of conflict-related sexual violence, including at least one instance of rape, could not be verified, available circumstantial evidence may be indicative of some forms of sexual violence. In this kibbutz, similar to other locations, female victims were found fully or partially naked to the waist down, with their hands tied behind their backs, and shot. In the Nahal Oz military base, the mission team reviewed reports of sexual violence, including a case of rape and genital mutilation, neither of which could be verified. With respect to the latter instance, while the forensic analysis reviewed injuries to intimate body parts, no discernible pattern could be identified against either female or male soldiers. However, 7 female soldiers were abducted from this base into Gaza. With respect to hostages, the mission team found clear and convincing information. Hostages, this is important. That some have been subjected to various forms of conflict-related sexual violence, including rape and sexualized torture and sexualized, cruel, inhuman, and degrading treatment. And it also has reasonable grounds to believe that such violence may be ongoing. This is extremely important because there are still hostages held. I talked to the Hostages and Missing Families Forum. That is the Bring Them Home group that is that spreads all those chains and hoodies and makes all the ads to advocate for the return of hostages. They told me that there are currently 134, I believe, hostages still held by Hamas. They have credible information that around 30 of those are already dead, but they are still kept by Hamas. Their bodies are still kept by Hamas. With the others, they don't know if they are alive or dead, and Hamas won't give them any information. In fact, Hamas doesn't know. Hamas doesn't know how many of the hostages are still alive or dead. Apparently, Hamas can report immediately, within seconds after an incident, how many people died, but they don't know how many of the hostages are still alive and how many are not, the ones in their own captivity. And there were reports already, although they were kind of under the radar, that so all the hostages that came back were inspected by doctors and by different experts who told the media that there is clear proof and clear evidence that that many of the victims, many of the hostages, like in one batch, there were 10 of them experienced sexual violence of some sort, either full-fledged rape or other kinds of sexual violence as when they were in captivity by Hamas and other groups, or even regular citizens, regular civilians in Gaza. So they know that these things occurred, which means that the hostages held are still in danger. Many of them may be experiencing sexual violence as we speak by the great moral Islamic resistance movement, Hamas. The ICJ, the International Court of Justice, on January 26th, when they did their preliminary ruling, they did tell Hamas that they must immediately and unconditionally release all hostages in their captivity. And despite Hamas saying that they would comply with anything that the ICJ rules, they so far did not comply with that at all. They're still making conditions. they're supposed to release the hostages immediately and unconditionally. Not doing that means going against the ruling of the ICJ, and they're just shooting themselves in the foot right now with that. Mission was not intended to be and is not a substitute for an investigation by relevant United Nations entities mandated for that purpose, nor is it a replacement for criminal investigations and proceedings subject to due process of law. Some geniuses were like, oh, look, this is not an investigation anyway. Well, that's how it goes. First, a team goes and establishes reasonable grounds, and then a full-fledged criminal investigation starts investigating all of the evidence and establishing the case until they reach a solution or a conclusion and a conviction. The primary standard of proof in this report is one of reasonable grounds to believe. There have been occasions where more information has supported a finding of fact, and the overall finding has therefore been stated to be established at the level of clear and convincing information. United Nations reporting has used a clear and convincing standard, and although there is no single definition of the term, it is generally agreed that clear and convincing information or evidence rises above reasonable grounds to believe, yet falls below beyond a reasonable doubt. So some of the things that are here explained as clear and convincing are even stronger than reasonable grounds, which means there is very little reason to doubt that something occurred, that a certain crime occurred. Full cooperation of the government of Israel, important. It visited several identified sites like Nahal Oz military base, Kibbutz Be'eri, the Nova Music Festival site, and Road 232 with the support of the Israeli authorities. Not all sites mentioned in this report could be visited due to time and security constraints, and where relevant, the mission team gathered documentary and digital information and interviewed witnesses and other sources without undertaking an on-site visit. 33 meetings with representatives of the Israeli national institutions. Forensic pathologist and a digital analyst reviewed over 5,000 photos, around 50 hours, and several audio files of footage of the attacks. CCTV, traffic surveillance cameras, actual cameras, body cameras, and so on. All right. 27 representatives of Israeli civil society, including the Hostages and Missing Families Forum, NGOs, academics, and activists working on women's rights, sexual violence, and international criminal law during 7 meetings, at which information was shared. The mission team also met with families and relatives of hostages still held in captivity, as well as some members of the community displaced from kibbutz Nir Oz. Further, the mission team carried out its own confidential interviews with survivors and witnesses of the 7 October attacks, released hostages, first responders, health professionals, service providers, and others. In total, the mission team conducted interviews according to UN standards and methodology, with a total of 34 interviewees. 3 cumulative waves of attacks resulted in ruthless levels of violence, including against numerous civilian and military targets. The first wave was reportedly composed of Hamas commandos. The second wave of Hamas, Palestinian Islamic Jihad, Popular Resistance Committees, and other Palestinian military organizations breaching from Gaza that joined the ongoing operation. And the third wave of armed elements and unarmed individuals entering from Gaza into Israel. This is actually quite important. So 3 cumulative waves of attacks came from Gaza. And the UN confirms this here. The first wave is Hamas commandos. The second wave is regular Hamas members and other paramilitary organizations that joined the operation. And then the third wave of armed elements and unarmed individuals entering from Gaza into Israel. That means civilians. Yeah. That means civilians. Unarmed elements can be anything that carries a gun, but especially unarmed individuals means civilians. Civilians from Gaza also joined in on the attack. And once the first wave of Hamas commandos breached the fences and opened the gates into Israel, first the regular fighters and the regular terrorists, and then the civilians, also terrorists, entered and participated. Attacks took place over hours. Some remained in there for several days. They came with high caliber and military grade weapons and equipment ranging from rocket propelled grenades, automatic rifles, M16s or Kalashnikovs, ample ammunition, grenades, explosives, flammable substances, and restraints, including zip ties. There were people who, from the beginning, said things like, "Oh, look, that scene looks burned. But which Hamas member has helicopters? They can't burn. They can burn vehicles. They can burn people. It's clear. They only have guns. They only have pistols and sticks. It's clear that an IDF helicopter came in and shot these people and fired rockets and so on." These people were people who said that kind of stuff from the beginning, including, but not limited to, that scumbag Syrian girl, Jackson Hinkle, Jake Shields, Suleiman Ahmed, and all the other Hamas apologists, terror apologists, people, are not only stupid and ignorant, if we are to take them as reliable people or as trustworthy people, they're also they're actually liars and terrorist apologists, because we have seen from the very, very first day when the attacks happened and when Hamas was broadcasting it, that Hamas members went into Israel and they were firing with RPGs. They were firing rockets at vehicles. They were firing rockets at homes, into crowds, throwing grenades, and so on. And rocket-propelled grenades, other flammable substances, all of these things can burn people to death, and so on. And can burn vehicles and homes. Approximately 1,200 individuals were left dead. Certain places like Kibbutz Be'eri reportedly losing over 10% of the population. I want to say just one thing again, when I have the chance, again and again, which is that places like these, Kibbutz Be'eri, are civilian communities that are very close to the border, that are like, I don't know, 1-2 kilometers or 5 kilometers and so on to the border, walking distance, very short driving distance. And these communities were built by Zionists, by Jews. They were not taken from these other people. The places were empty. And the people who lived there, and especially who lived there before October 7, were mostly people who were the greatest leftist peace activist people in Israel. Many of them, like Kibbutz Be'eri and other places like Kibbutz Kisufim, where I went to visit, in places like Reim and other places. These communities were communities that constantly helped Gazans, including bringing them food, giving them gifts, taking their kids and taking them to the hospital, always looking out for them, and so on. These were the most helpful communities, the most peace activist communities that did whatever they could to help Gazans. On October 7th, they were the first to be attacked and brutally massacred and raped and tortured and taken hostage. It didn't matter what they did. It didn't matter how helpful and how good they were. They were the first to be killed in the most brutal ways. So it doesn't really matter if you are an anti-Zionist or a peace activist and all of that. It doesn't matter to them at all. If you stand in the way, if they see you, you are dead. That's it. They killed Muslims inside Israel. They killed Arabs inside Israel. And there is a video of them putting an Arab Muslim on the ground, tying his hands, possibly later killing him, and basically insulting him. And he's like, "Oh, by Allah." And the guy says, "Shut up, don't talk about Allah. You're a traitor. You work for these dogs." That's what he says. That's how they operated. 134 individuals remain in captivity in Gaza. Some hostages are or are presumed to be dead. Stakeholders, material reviewed by the mission team describe an indiscriminate campaign to kill. An indiscriminate campaign to kill, inflict suffering, and abduct the maximum number possible of men, women, and children, soldiers and civilians alike, in the minimum possible amount of time. People were shot, often at close range, burned alive in their homes as they tried to hide in their safe rooms, gunned down or killed by grenades in bomb shelters where they sought refuge, and hunted down at the Nova Music Festival site. Hunted down. As well as in the fields and roads adjacent to the Nova Music Festival ground. Other violations included sexual violence, abduction of hostages and corpses, the public display of captives, both dead and alive, the mutilation of corpses, including decapitation, and the looting and destruction of civilian property. This is the Islamic resistance movement fighting for freedom, fighting the occupation. The Nova Music Festival, an outdoor event in an open field about 5 kilometers from the Gaza perimeter fence, attracted around 3,500 attendees, mainly young individuals. Information reviewed by the mission team indicates that the festival was a site of grave violations, including brutal mass murders, with several hundreds of bodies recovered from the site, in addition to many abductions. Bodies were also found with extensive burn damage. Based on the examination of available information, including credible statements by eyewitnesses, there are reasonable grounds to believe that multiple incidents of rape, including gang rape, occurred in and around the Nova Festival site during the October 7 attacks. Credible information was obtained regarding multiple incidents whereby victims were subjected to rape and then killed. Raped and killed. There's lots of circumstantial evidence and witness accounts that describe this. And keep in mind, this is not a report written by random people who just went there and listened to a bunch of people. This is a report written by, made up of a team of, I believe, 9 experts on sexual violence and other UN members. There are further accounts of individuals who witnessed at least 2 incidents of rape of corpses of women. At least 2 incidents of rape of corpses of women. You hear that? A rape of corpses of women. Necrophilia. Videos, big coincidence, by Hamas members after being captured by the Israeli police, admitting to doing specifically that. They became animals. It's a thing a person doesn't do. There it is. Beheading people, having sex with dead bodies, meaning the body of a dead woman. It's a body, it's not humans that do that. And things like that happened. Yes. This guy, this guy is describing other Hamas members doing that. He is a Hamas member, captured from October 7. He describes other Hamas members as having sex with dead bodies, raping dead bodies. There's no reason to believe that this guy also didn't participate in that. Raping dead bodies, raping the corpses of women. Other credible sources at the Nova Music Festival site described seeing multiple murdered individuals, mostly women, whose bodies were found naked from the waist down, some totally naked, with some gunshots in the head and or tied, including with their hands bound behind their backs and tied to structures such as trees or poles. Road 232 and other escape routes. Faced with the attacks, Nova Music Festival goers and other residents reportedly fled along various escape routes, including Road 232 and the surrounding fields. Along Road 232, numerous bodies with severe injuries, such as multiple gunshot wounds and destructive burn damage, were found, including in and around damaged or burned vehicles, as well as piled in several bomb shelters. There are reasonable grounds to believe that sexual violence occurred on and around Road 232. Credible information based on corroborating witness accounts described an incident involving the rape of 2 women. The mission team received other accounts of rape, including gang rape, which could not be verified during the time provided and would require further investigation. Along this road, several bodies were found with genital injuries, along with injuries to other body parts. Discernible patterns of genital mutilation could not be verified at this time, but warrant future investigation. So patterns of genital mutilation could not be verified, but require further investigation, although there were several bodies found with genital injuries and with other injuries to other body parts. Many bodies along Road 232 also suffered destructive burn damage. And conclusions as to conflict-related sexual violence, including genital mutilation, related to these incidents could not be drawn. Okay. The mission team was also able to ascertain that multiple bodies of women and a few men were found totally or partially naked or with their clothes torn, including some bound and or attached to structures which, though circumstantial, may be indicative of some forms of sexual violence. This is a very careful legal approach here. There's a pattern of repeatedly victims here being stripped half naked or completely naked, and with their hands tied behind their backs and attached to structures. And it looks like they did that because they sexually abused, they raped these victims. But this is called circumstantial evidence, so it needs to be further investigated. It's pretty clear to me. Within the kibbutz itself, in one area close to the entrance, the bodies of at least 2 women were found inside a home, on the floor and naked, with gunshot wounds to their heads. This is again one of those things. You can try as hard as possible to defend your Islamist terrorist bastards here. Why is there a repeated pattern, now fully established and confirmed by the UN team, of Hamas members and other Gazan terrorists going and stripping women naked and shooting them in the head? And of course, these are just to highlight how barbaric, how messed up, how disgusting, how inhuman, and how undeserving of any mercy these people are. It's already enough that they go into civilian towns, into homes, and target and kill random people. They claimed at the very beginning, and they still claim, that this was an attack on military targets. It was not. They overwhelmingly attacked civilians. They attacked civilian communities. They killed people in their homes. They killed people, over 300 people, close to 400 people at a festival, and captured them. That was not a military target. Witness testimony gathered for this area is consistent with possible sexual violence. However, these could not be verified in the time provided and would require further investigation. Kibbutz Be'eri is one of the places with a lot of pretty bad footage, pretty ugly footage. Kibbutz Be'eri is located within the Gaza periphery along Road 232. Interviews of survivors of the attack and intervening first responders, alongside reviewed audiovisual material, attested that the kibbutz was severely affected by the October 7 attacks, with fighting spanning over the course of 2 days. The kibbutz suffered a significant number of casualties, with reportedly over 10% of its population killed, including children, and some 50 people taken hostage to Gaza during the attacks. The location had been identified as a priority for the mission team due to serious reports of conflict-related sexual violence. The mission team conducted a site visit to Be'eri and witnessed firsthand the magnitude of destruction within the kibbutz, with rows of houses burned, riddled with bullets, and many reduced to rubble. We have so many videos of this community being brutally attacked, of Hamas walking through the civilian homes and shooting into them, shooting on sight, firing rockets from the distance, throwing grenades into their homes, and so on. At least 2 of the allegations of sexual violence previously reported were determined by the mission team to be unfounded, due to either new superseding information or inconsistency in the information gathered, including first responder testimonies, photographic evidence, and other information. These included the allegation of a pregnant woman whose womb had reportedly been ripped open before she was killed. So they say that this is considered unfounded and probably did not happen. That is good. With her fetus stabbed while still inside her. They say this is likely unfounded. That is good. Another such account was the interpretation initially made of the body of a girl found separated from the rest of her family, naked from the waist down. It was determined by the mission team that the crime scene had been altered by a bomb squad and the bodies moved, explaining the separation of the body of the girl from the rest of her family. This is one of the things that people now say, why were they not more careful in their operations? But it was the middle of a war while terrorists are still in there. So a bomb squad moved the body, probably had to be done, which is why it's explained. However, of course, it's not entirely. It is still the case that she was naked from the waist down. Allegations of objects found inserted in female genital organs also could not be verified by the mission team, due in large part to the limited availability and low quality of imagery. Okay. Full-fledged investigation will follow. The mission team received credible information about bodies found naked and or tied, and in one case gagged, in some of the kibbutz's destroyed houses and their surroundings. Some say this was a military operation, that October 7 was a military operation. Does this sound like a military operation to these bastards? Going into people's homes, stripping them naked, tying them up, gagging them, and then killing them. While verification of sexual violence against these victims was not possible, circumstantial evidence, notably the pattern of female victims found undressed and bound, may be indicative of some forms of sexual violence. What this basically means is that it is very likely that they were sexually abusing the female victims that were found repeatedly undressed and tied and killed. Overall, the mission team was unable to establish whether sexual violence occurred in Kibbutz Be'eri. Further investigations may determine whether incidents of sexual violence occurred. So there is a pattern, but they need more information and further investigation. Kibbutz Kfar Aza. During the attacks on Kibbutz Kfar Aza, located about 3 kilometers from the Gaza perimeter fence, approximately 50 residents out of its population of around 700 were killed. When hundreds of militants entered the kibbutz armed with military-grade weaponry, most killings were reported to have occurred in the 12 hours before the IDF were deployed to the area. 12 hours before the IDF were deployed to the area. Dozens of houses were burned. Fighting between militants and the IDF forces in and around the kibbutz was reported to have ended only on October 10, complicating the recovery of bodies. The mission team collected information from first responders who reported discovering bodies of women naked with their hands tied behind their backs and gunshot wounds to the head. Now, here's something interesting. There are some of these terrorist supporters, again, who will say things like, oh, you can't trust the first responders. They're just biased Israelis. The report already established multiple instances or a pattern of victims in different locations being stripped naked, especially women, and their hands tied behind their backs and gunshots in their heads, or tied to structures and then killed this way. So when they go and hear such accounts from first responders, this is pretty much a corroborating evidence. They are presenting something which they themselves can already independently confirm. So they don't have to trust the first responders anymore. They already know that this is indeed a thing and that they are most likely not making it up. While verification of sexual violence against these victims was not possible at this point, available circumstantial information, notably here it is, a recurring pattern of female victims found undressed, bound, and shot again and again, female victims found undressed, stripped naked, bound, and shot, indicates that sexual violence, including potential sexualized torture or cruel, inhuman, and degrading treatment, may have occurred. This is the Islamic resistance movement. Nahal Oz military base operated as a hub for signals intelligence and monitoring of the Gaza perimeter fence. A significant number of male and female soldiers stationed in this base were killed in the October 7 attacks. 7 young women undertaking their mandatory military service were abducted from Nahal Oz military base and taken to Gaza. The mission team reviewed reports concerning a case of rape, which could not be verified at this point. It also reviewed reports of sexual violence, including one case of genital mutilation of one male soldier and several female soldiers during the attack on the military base, which likewise could not be established. The photos from the identification process of 41 killed soldiers from Nahal Oz military base were scrutinized by the mission team. After excluding corpses with destructive burn damage and one corpse with very limited photos, the photos of 20 men and 9 women remained for analysis. Among these soldiers, while the forensic analysis reviewed injuries to intimate body parts, no discernible pattern of targeted injuries to intimate body parts could be identified in either sex. Okay, so no discernible pattern could be identified. Specifically, 7 soldiers did exhibit gunshot wounds around the genitalia and or buttocks, though along with multiple gunshots wounds to other body parts such as the trunk and legs. As such, the review was inconclusive with regards to patterns of genital mutilation. One discernible pattern emerged. 24 out of 29 soldiers displayed apparent, often multiple gunshot wounds to the head. I just want to describe one thing, 2 images that I know from this base and the other place in Reem, where they took soldiers with them. No, one is from the military base itself, where they are filming themselves stomping on the dead body of a soldier repeatedly, and just having fun with the dead body of a soldier, just hitting the head of the soldier repeatedly, shooting at the head, stomping, and also, sorry to speak it out, but basically putting the guns into the deformed and shot in face of a soldier and mutilating it. And another instance is of a soldier taken back to Gaza by these Hamas terrorists, and then laid down into the middle of a street among cheering dozens of regular Gazan civilians, who then together start kicking and beating and mutilating that body in the middle of the street. Okay. Sexual violence against hostages taken to Gaza. The mission team reviewed incidents of alleged sexual violence related to hostages in Gaza. Based on the first-hand accounts of released hostages, the mission team received clear and convincing information. There it is. This here is very, very crucial. Let's go back to where this is addressed. Clear and convincing. Clear and convincing. Let's see what the report says in the beginning here. So, although the primary standard of proof in this report is one of reasonable grounds to believe, there have been occasions where more information has supported a finding of fact, and the overall finding has therefore been stated to be established at the level of clear and convincing information. United Nations reporting has used a clear and convincing standard, and although there is no single definition of the term, it is generally agreed that clear and convincing information or evidence rises above reasonable grounds to believe, yet falls below beyond a reasonable doubt. So anything that is described as clear and convincing is stronger than in confidence than anything that I read so far here. They're almost sure. The mission team reviewed incidents of alleged sexual violence related to hostages in Gaza. Based on the first-hand accounts of released hostages, the mission team received clear and convincing information that sexual violence, including rape, sexualized torture, and cruel, inhuman, and degrading treatment occurred against some women and children during their time in captivity, and has reasonable grounds to believe that this violence may be ongoing. So here are two things to unpack. First off, these experts, based on first-hand accounts, have clear and convincing information. So they're pretty much sure. The only thing left is basically court proceedings and a systematic analysis of all of the evidence. But they're sure that sexual violence, including rape, sexualized torture, and cruel, inhuman and degrading treatment occurred against some women and children during their time in captivity in Gaza. Yes. This is what the UN team here concludes and says. That the Hamas bastards and the others sexually abused, so raped, sexually tortured, and otherwise treated in cruel, inhuman, and degrading ways women and children that they captured and brought to Gaza. And further, based on this information, they have reasonable grounds to believe that this violence may be ongoing. So, since they know that lots of the women and children saved and brought back experienced rape and sexual torture and other things during their time in Gaza, they therefore think it is safe to assume that those captives who are still held in Gaza, dead or alive, may still be sexually assaulted, tortured, and otherwise treated in brutal and inhuman ways by Hamas and other parties. This is why this woman in charge urged Israel to say, I understand the point, but please make sure to do at least a temporary ceasefire and get all the hostages out of there, because they may be getting raped and sexually tortured and otherwise mistreated as we speak. Based on first-hand accounts of released hostages, there are reasonable grounds to believe that female hostages were also subjected to other forms of sexual violence. Other findings not linked to specific locations. The mission team also gathered and reviewed information based on photos and videos of October 7 attacks that could not yet be linked to a specific location of the attacks. The mission team was able to determine that at least 100 bodies had destructive burn damage, preventing any findings of what may have occurred to those individuals, including any assessment of sexual violence. 100 bodies had destructive burn damage. I saw many of those videos and photos. Go on Hamas-massacre.net or go on 10/7th.org. 10/7th.com. Or look for the Telegram channel Hamas Atrocities or October 7 Slaughter. Look through all of the videos. In the medical legal assessment of available photos and videos, no tangible indications of rape could be identified. Further investigations may alter this assessment in the future. Okay, so from the photos and videos, they couldn't identify tangible indications. Nevertheless, considering the nature of rape, which often does not result in visible injuries, that's why. This possibility cannot be ruled out based solely on the medical legal assessment. Therefore, the mission team concluded that circumstantial indicators like the position of the corpse and the state of clothing should also be considered when determining the occurrence of sexual violations, in addition to witness and survivor testimony. In the medical legal assessment undertaken by the mission team of available photos and videos of crime scenes, a few corpses with conspicuously spread legs were observed. These postures could not be adequately explained by, for instance, post-mortem pugilistic posturing due to burn damage. Post-mortem pugilistic posturing is this posture that dead bodies have when they are burned to death because of the shrinking of tissues because of the heat and muscles and all of that, where the body starts going into this posture of forming hands that come together and legs that are raised. So that happens not when a body is burned after they are killed, but rather when they are burned to death. And there are plenty of bodies that are found in this posture, which shows that they were burned to death. However, what they're saying here is that a few corpses with conspicuously spread legs were observed, and their stances, their postures cannot be explained by this phenomenon. The reviewed photos and videos further revealed a minimum of 20 corpses with partially or fully exposed intimate body parts, such as breasts and genitalia, resulting from the absence, displacement, or tearing of clothing. Also, at least 10 distinct corpses displayed indications of bound wrist and or tied legs. These are just from the photos and videos. Okay, yeah. Just from the photos and videos, 20 corpses with partially or fully exposed intimate body parts, such as breasts and genitalia, resulting from the absence, displacement, or tearing of clothes. Also, at least 10 distinct corpses displayed indications of bound wrists or tied legs. You know what the thing here is? These Hamas supporters, Islamists, or even others, some of the leftist communists and other people who support Hamas, they see the things that were done. They see the evidence. They hear of the evidence. They read the reports or whatever they want to read from it. And they still don't think that this is worthy of condemnation. They still justify what these people did. They still make excuses such as, well, you never talk about what was done to them. Of course, when you treat them badly, they will come and do these and these and these and that and those things to you. This is the sickness of their mind. They think under certain circumstances, if some evil was done to a certain population, it is then justified for them to become completely inhuman and enter a civilian population and rape bodies, rape people alive or dead, tie them up, strip them naked, touch them, kill them, burn them, and so on. They think it depends on the context, on the situation. It can be relatively morally justified to do that to people. And what that implies is that you could make accusations about a certain population, right? Like that atrocities are committed by that population, and you don't have to fully establish and prove that those atrocities are indeed true. All you need to do is to believe that those atrocities are committed, and then you can justify going into that population and doing all kinds of inhuman things to them, like raping them, mutilating them, burning them alive, tying them up and humiliating them, and so on, stripping them naked, and so on. This is the slippery slope. This is the consequence of such a sick system where you justify these atrocities because, well, something bad was done to them, so they can also do it to others. It should never be justifiable. Even if it were true that those people were oppressed, which they weren't, nothing like this should be justifiable. And if people do that, that means they have a very, very skewed moral compass. And remember what Amalek did to you. The reviewed photos and videos revealed widespread mutilation of bodies, involving both attempted and actual decapitation, numerous gunshot wounds, and various other forms of extensive violence. The medico-legal assessment of available photos and videos revealed multiple corpses with injuries, predominantly gunshot wounds, including to intimate parts such as breasts and genitalia, because in most instances, additional injuries were also seen on other body parts. No discernible pattern of genital mutilation could be established. Given the incomplete overview of evidence at this stage, subsequent investigation, including cross-linking of injury patterns with geographical information, may provide additional insights. So this is aside from everything that was mentioned before, in locations that cannot be attributed to a certain place at the moment. Destructive burn damage in at least 100 corpses further impeded the assessment of targeted genital mutilation. Destructive burn damage in 100 corpses. The digital evidence discovered during an independent open source review appeared authentic and unmanipulated. While the mission team reviewed extensive digital material depicting a range of egregious violations, no digital evidence specifically depicting acts of sexual violence was found in open sources. Yeah, because even Hamas will probably not film themselves raping somebody. They could film themselves beheading and mutilating somebody, but not raping somebody, because that's unacceptable to their standard to film it. Of course, you might do it, but you can't film it, right? It's like you can't look at, like women shouldn't be uncovered and shouldn't show themselves outside. Can't look at them, but it's okay if you go in there and rape them and brutally kill them while raping them. Attribution. Hamas and other Palestinian armed groups, including but not limited to the Palestinian Islamic Jihad and Popular Resistance Committees, have claimed responsibility for the attacks of October 7. In its report, Our Narrative, Operation Al-Aqsa Flood, Hamas has, however, denied claims of harm against civilians, including the commission of rape. Given the mission was not investigative, it did not gather information and or draw conclusions on attribution of alleged violations to specific armed groups. Such attribution would require a fully fledged investigative process. What some people don't know to this day is that Hamas was not the only organization that participated in the October 7 attacks. Hamas was the leader of this operation. Hamas was the leader of the October 7 attacks. They planned it and they breached defenses and they poured in like the rats that they are. But Palestinian Islamic Jihad, which is another Islamist terrorist organization that is actually even more extreme than Hamas, joined them. They were their closest allies. And also other organizations, not just Islamists, by the way, also other organizations that are secular and that are socialist or communist joined them as well. So the leadership here is very much Islamist, but not all of the elements that joined the attack were Islamists. Has to be pointed out. So you could say, oh, it's about ideology, it's about Islamic extremism and this and that. I'm sorry, but as much as I like to say that Islam is a big problem, I must say it is not limited to Islam. It is not limited to the Islamic jihadists. It's not just limited to that. It also includes other groups. The Popular Resistance Committee is, for example, a different group that does not have Islamism at its core, but rather just Palestinian nationalism and anti-Zionism. Some of the groups that joined were, for example, the PFLP, which is less known today, was much more known in the past. Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine. It's a Palestinian Marxist-Leninist revolutionary socialist organization. Communists. They also joined in the attack. Another group was the Democratic Front for the Liberation of Palestine. Here. That's a socialist group that split from the PFLP. Communism, Marxism, Leninism, Maoism, Palestinian nationalism, left-wing nationalism, anti-Zionism. Leftist groups, communists, and socialists also joined in on this attack. Not just Islamists. Conclusions. Overall, based on the totality of information gathered from multiple and independent sources at the different locations, there are reasonable grounds to believe that conflict-related sexual violence occurred at several locations across the Gaza periphery, including in the form of rape and gang rape during the 7 October attacks. Credible circumstantial information which may be indicative of some form of sexual violence, including genital mutilation, sexualized torture, or cruel, inhuman, and degrading treatment, was also gathered. With regards to the hostages, the mission team found clear and convincing information that some hostages taken to Gaza have been subjected to various forms of conflict-related sexual violence, and has reasonable grounds to believe that such violence may be occurring. Sexual violence occurred at several locations across the Gaza periphery, including rape and gang rape. Credible circumstantial information may be indicative of some forms of sexual violence, including genital mutilation, sexualized torture, or cruel, inhuman, and degrading treatment. The mission team was unable to establish the prevalence of sexual violence and concludes that the overall magnitude, scope, and specific attribution of these violations would require a full-fledged investigation. A comprehensive investigation would enable the information base to be expanded in locations which the mission team was not able to visit, and to build the required trust with supervisors, victims of conflict-related sexual violence, who may be reluctant to come forward at this point. People are in denial. And they're making all kinds of accusations now and saying, oh, the UN has been fooled by Israel. This is not being fooled by Israel. This is as objective as it gets, and as careful and legalistic and forensic as it gets. And it shows that they have reason to believe, reason that would convince a reasonable person, that multiple acts of sexual violence, including rape, gang rape, mutilation, and so on, were committed by Gazans against Israelis inside Israel and Gaza. Patterns of people being stripped naked, tied up, and killed, possibly raped, attached to trees and poles, tied up and naked. Some just with their pants taken off, tied, which indicates that there was probably a rape taking place. Bodies burned up, dead bodies raped, and so on. And this report, and also, even stronger evidence with even higher confidence that hostages were sexually abused with almost certainty in Gaza after being taken hostage by Hamas. And reasonable grounds to believe that hostages currently kept by Hamas are still experiencing sexual violence and torture as we speak, which is why they must be taken out of there, released as soon as possible. And no matter where you stand, I don't really care. After this point, no matter what happens within the next few months, no matter when the fighting eventually continues, no matter if there is a ceasefire in between or not, eventually what needs to be done is to completely and fully destroy Hamas and make sure none of this ever happens again, that none of this can ever happen again. And maybe to go back to the policy that Israel had initially when they disengaged from the Gaza Strip, to say, if missiles are fired, if Gaza elects a leadership that attacks Israel, we will give up on all kinds of plans for autonomy and go in there and take the whole thing and re-educate it and govern it ourselves. If it needs to be done, Israel should do it. No such thing should ever be tolerated by any population, by anyone in the world. Remember what Amalek did to you, as the Bible says. It's clear that Hamas and other groups, or even civilians, did commit sexual assaults, sexual violence in different forms on multiple occasions to Israelis on October 7th. And I hope they pay for that. Spread what you heard and what you saw. I will put a link to this entire report in the description, and also quickly just pin it here for all those who want to look at it, and also quickly show on the screen. So here is the link. I'm putting it into the description and pinning into the chat and pinning it, and we'll also add it to the description. If you click the link, you will land on this side, which is the UN news story page. What is happening to me? Okay, and on this side, when you are on the story here, it says right here, Pramila Patten added in a press release issued along with the report. And once you click on the report, you can see the entire report that I just went through. Access it if you need to read this, read summaries, spread the information, spread everything that you heard, make people know about the truth. Thanks so much, everyone, for joining and listening. And I hope that the criminals are brought to justice. I hope that there is peace and hope. And I stand with Israel.